Okay, so thank you so much for joining. I'm surrounded by esteemed celebrities. It's come to my attention that now I have become a KOL, so you know, bad things happen to good people. Anyways, so yeah, it's a wonderful topic, extremely boring, so we're going to keep it spicy. Looks like from the monolithic or integrated, whatever you call it, Mert, you're the only person? Okay,
Yep.
so I have a question, right? So for all the esteemed panelists, I mean, why do I care about whether something is modular or monolithic? I mean, all I need is a ticker or a contract address. I type it in BonkBot, and it's, the meme coin shows up, right? Who cares about modular or monolithic? Mustafa, you want to start?
Well, I mean, I think, this is like the 100th modular versus monolithic debate, right? So, it's like the annual debate. But, I think for me, it's not like, for me, it's more of a developer experience thing. So, ideally, from the user perspective, there shouldn't be a difference between them necessarily interacting with the modular or monolithic chain, except for what kind of products you can build with a modular chain. So, the main advantage of modularism is that it gives developers full stack flexibility over how they create applications, because there's many applications that require their own execution environments that aren't easily or economically possible on chains like Ethereum or Solana. And those customizability allows developers to create user experiences that might not be possible with a shared smart contract environment. I think one cool example of that is, for example, there's a chain called Pay, which is like a payments application that has a really good user experience, and that's not that they had to build it as a rollup because they weren't able to build it using a shared smart contract environment because of two things. They had to use like special ZK cryptography, implement special ZK cryptography to make the payments private, and that's cryptography that might be expensive from a gas perspective to compute on Ethereum or Solana, for example, because they don't have the opcodes, and also they have like very fast latency, and having a sequencer or the centralized sequencer allows them to have very fast latency that might not be possible otherwise.
Okay, so you're saying that developers would, at least a wide class of developers would prefer a modular stack because it gives them more freedom, more flexibility, more expressiveness, so on and so forth. So Anurag, you were early to the modular thesis as well, not as early as the CIA hacker, but very, very early to modular as well. So what's your thesis for why we need a modular stack and why, let's say, every time I talk to Anatoly, he says that we're going to just handle everybody's traffic. So why do we need modular blockchains?
Yeah, I've been in the crypto space since 2017. The first product that we started off really was this plasma solution that we were trying to build, which was, the first off-chain scaling solution for Ethereum. Then, of course, rollups came into the picture and all that, right? Essentially, the thing is, like Solana or monolithic blockchains essentially follow that big block bigger blockchain sort of a thesis, right? Like that is for the first generation of blockchains. Like Ethereum, after Ethereum, there was this long list of chains that wanted to make better versions of Ethereum, whether these were big blocks, faster blocks, less cost, for example, and so on. And so, of course, Solana did a lot of great work, parallelization, and a bunch of other stuff. In general, of course, Ethereum took the more modular sort of approach in the sense that they didn't want to scale the base chain. I come from a very simple thesis in the sense that if you look at apps on the internet do not live on one single big supercomputer.
Yeah.
They live on separate servers, are scaled independently based on demand. I think the same thing is going to happen with blockchains. Of course, it needs to be trust minimized. These different components need to share security zones and stuff like that. Not getting into the weeds. But really, 1,000 chains composed well should work better than one big chain. That is really my thesis.
To come back to your question, Ajit, should we care about modular or monolithic chains? It depends who you are, right? If you're a developer or if you're a builder, you will want to make sure you get the best components. But if you're a user, which is probably where we all want to pay attention to, or we are all paying attention to, you don't want to care. This is why we see also a lot of the initiatives from account abstractions and many other projects which are trying to abstract this. So maybe at some point the developers will find solutions where it's going to abstract all of this.
I'm going to contextualize this, right? So you come from Ethereum, we were at Consensus together, then you went to work for DYDX, the guys who abandoned our great Ethereum chain to build their own. So I'll forgive you for that. But so there is clearly some value in the app chain thesis, and then why did you guys build your own Cosmos app chain and not just stay on Starknet or something? If the modular thesis is going so well, you guys could have stayed on Starknet, right? Or StarkX?
I think it was a decision made partially by the engineering team, which was at some point frustrated to have a dependency on the progress of one roadmap. If you go into general purpose blockchain, the project behind the general purpose blockchain is trying to accommodate NFTs, smart contracts, DA, and all kind of things. And you come with your very specific demands for your very specific app, and you realize eventually you have to queue, and the team is busy, and it's not coming at the pace you like. And when you have the chance to have like the momentum of DYDX, at some point you're like, why are we waiting someone else to be delivering something to enable the business further? So I think that's what triggered really the move to the app chain, so you can get in control of the full stack, and you can really accelerate.
So what you're saying is that underlying the modular thesis, there is this, the history of app chains, right? Where you essentially want to create your own execution context, where you have your own quality of service guarantees, you have your own, parameters like KYC and so on and so forth. So, and that requires people to build their own app chains. Mert, you come from the other side of this, so I don't know which side you're on, but so Solana thesis is quite different, right? So when we think of like an integrated or monolithic chain, we think of Solana. So what's...
yeah, and by the way, it's integrated, not monolithic. So look, I mean, the modular versus monolithic thing, the reason why we keep having these debates is because it doesn't map back to reality. And like it's actually already been conflated so far before I even got the chance to talk, which was the conflation of like modular with like app chains. But like the real dichotomies are app specific versus general purpose, and then L1 versus L2. Yep. Did a post with John Sharp about this, where we kind of go over it in detail. Modular versus monolithic is kind of like, I mean, I think some of us, or most of us probably know that modular kind of came out from more of a brand marketing play. And like, I understand what it's trying to do, and it makes sense, but like trying to map it to something like how monolithic architectures are in Web 2 does not map to Web 3. So the reason why we call Solana integrated is because the software components within the L1 are not tightly coupled. They're actually still interchangeable. So for example, Solana is going to separate out execution and consensus, which will actually allow it to add something like...
Which is what you're talking about when you say network extensions.
No, so this would be, that's a whole different thing. That's a weird Kyle Samani special. But in terms of like separating execution and consensus, once you do that, you can start doing things like sending samples of blocks and start increasing the DA throughput or the scaling of the DA layer. And then in terms of like, so for example, you can have, Solana does a bunch of things that are enshrined within the L1. That's a better way to think about it, as opposed to modular tends to outsource it. So like, I think of it as like building a Windows computer versus like a Mac computer. Whereas like, you're still building a computer, but like with Windows, there's kind of different suppliers for different parts of the computer. Whereas with Apple just makes everything in-house, which has its benefits, but also has its obviously cons. And so the real thing that actually matters, which is actually real, is the use cases, right? So if you have something like, a very niche indie game or something, it does not need global state, right? It does not need to be on Solana. It can just be on its own app chain. It can be part of another L2. It can be, you have to work backwards from the use case that exists and then find the best solution for it. So like Solana, totally basically just really likes the idea of price discovery, low latency, and kind of atomic composability. And the idea behind that is that allows for better DeFi. Now that's
Right.
a thesis. It might not be correct, but that's kind of what it's optimizing for. And so not everything makes sense to build on every architecture. So again, you just have to work backwards from the use case.
Yeah, I was hoping for a little bit more spice there, but, you know.
Yeah, just
so-
also
right.
quickly to chime in, right? Like, I mean, it would seem intuitively like that modular, very, outsourcing all the work outside. But that's the current state, right? Like, I mean, essentially, there's no reason why you cannot enshrine more and more of the basic infrastructure that is required to sustain, let's say, a roll-up sort of future at the base layer, for example, right? Like, I mean, there's things that Ethereum's talking about, other players like us, Celestia, all are working on, for example. And I mean, of course, we just begun, right? Like, I mean, blockchains, Solana has been around for probably 6 years, maybe more.
3.5 to 4.
Sorry?
3.5 to 4.
Did it go live?
I think the first raise was 6 years ago.
Oh, the raise. Yeah, I'm just talking about mainnet.
Yeah.
Mainnet is, that's right.
Yeah, I mean, even 4 years is quite long. So I would say let the modular infrastructure settle in. You know, like I think it will be much more opinionated and not so hands off. There will be interop, sequencer coordination, a lot of basic infra.
Yeah, I'm trying to find some point of disagreement, and I'm not seeing it. You know, I like to provoke disagreement. It's more.
So
fun
I'll give you an
that way.
example.
Yeah.
So one of the things that's different about Solana is the storage and account model.
Yeah.
So like compute is cheap, meaning transactions are cheap, but like storing data is expensive, right? Because otherwise you can just wreck the validators with a lot of transactions, and they have to store state. And so we, with Helios, with Light Protocol, we ship something called ZK compression, and it's directly on the L1. It just uses the L1, and basically it puts the transactions onto the ledger, and then just statelessly replays them, and then exposes it to be like a stateless accumulator, much like Ethereum's endgame with like stateless like vertical clients and stuff. And so that was all within Solana. And so like then people started saying like, oh, well, like, you know, is Solana modular? And it's like, you know, all good software is modular anyways. It's
you even have those impure network extensions, and you know, like now ephemeral rollups are coming with magic block and stuff. So is Solana becoming modular anyway, while claiming not to be so?
I just really reject that premise because the software at the base layer was always modular because it's a very overlord term. In software, good systems are modular. You don't want to just
well, if you read
couple
Mustafa's
everything.
paper, right, I think it's very, very clear as to what he's talking about. So there is, sorry, go ahead, Mustafa.
Yeah, I mean,
Why don't you speak for yourself?
by modular, we specifically mean separating consensus from execution. But I think, like, fundamentally, like, we've had this modular versus monolithic debate for the past few years. But I think fundamentally, kind of like what it boils down to, or like why Celestia started pushing it from a marketing perspective is because we kind of wanted to reject this idea that one single synchronous chain is like the end and be all of crypto.
Yeah,
That's like the fundamental thing that we reject, effectively, because like everyone has Solana might be the final chain, I don't know, but there's so many L1s that everyone all the L1s think that they're the end game. So like in practice, the market, like we already live in a multi-chain ecosystem in practice. Like the market has decided that actually there will be multiple chains and there will be multiple bridges. You have Solana will connect to Ethereum with a wormhole. All these chains will coexist. That's what the market has decided.
So that's the substantive difference, right? So please correct my words, but Anatoly talks about like the single globally synchronized state machine that synchronizes at the speed of light. So essentially there is just one giant state machine with synchronous composability. So, you know, in Cosmos also there have been many flavors of this debate with synchronous versus async composability around the interchain thesis. So it's kind of like that. So I think with the modular thesis fundamentally rejects that notion that you're going to have a single globally synchronized
I mean, it's more like
machine.
We think that there will be multiple. There's a good, like Solana is a great chain with a good use case, and like I think the idea of having a single chain that tries to be like a decentralized NYSE or Nasdaq is actually a great idea, but it's more like that chain will coexist in a multi-chain ecosystem, and
so it kind of becomes a Cosmos app chain, which is what I sometimes troll you about. So which brings us to, sorry, go ahead, Matt.
I mean, Yeah, I mean, that's just correct. So like,
Okay.
one of the biggest misconceptions is like Solana's approach is like, there will be no other chain but me, like a crazy X or something. Like, it's not the case. I mean, it's always in the context of like NASDAQ or like, I mean, totally now calls it the financial computer. It's like some use cases like price discovery and like different types of, I don't know, shitcoins or something, perhaps benefit more from that sort of architecture. But like I said earlier, it's about the use case. Like a small indie game or like something like Pay, which I'm an investor in, by the way, those don't need a global state machine. Like not everything does. It's just about once there's a use case,
So
what's the
I have a
architecture that
question
solves
for
it?
you, because we are in this in a Cosmos event. How will that interoperate with the rest of the, with other Cosmos app chains, or with let's say rollups on Celestia or Avail, or with DYDX? How will Solana interoperate with all these other chains?
Well, actually, we work with DYDX. Helios does, and like Polaris, which is like Osmosis, and some EVM teams as well. I think it's just like, it's not too unlike, I don't know, international trade in a sense, where like some people, let's say they want to do cross-chain swaps because they like the coins on one chain, or like the liquidity on one chain or something, and they just need that as part of their application. It's like, yeah, then you can kind of, Solana should be interoperable. Like the point is not to be closed off.
So Cosmos people tend to be very emotional about IBC, right? It's kind of how we do things around here.
Yeah, and we're also, I've been approached by quite a few teams actually, which is kind of weird because it's supposed to be a standard. Like 3 teams maybe about kind of building that on Solana, which you need light clients for, which we're working on. And so like, we're all open to it. I mean, I was on a Polaris space with Lily, who's the head of Solana Foundation. The misconception is just that, like what I said, which is like, we're closed off, it's only this chain that exists and must exist, otherwise you're sinning, and the Pope will like, expedite you.
So let's go a step further, right, and try to make it a bit more tangible. So I think part of the criticism that Cosmos folks get, in particular, or now Ethereum folks get, is that we tend to build in a vacuum, with some kind of a research vacuum, and that sort of narrative also goes around from a lot of young people who are very active in the Solana ecosystem, that we tend to just build like Anoma or one of these just for the sake of research, and it just goes on and on with no user insight. So what sort of use cases, I know about DYDX, will we see modular chains or modular stacks like Avail and Celestia support better than, let's say, Solana? Mustafa and then Anurag, what sort of applications do we think
I mean,
we'll
like,
be able to show?
Like Solana had this great tagline, like only possible on Solana. So I kind of like to also think like what's only possible on Celestia, or like only possible on different ecosystems. And I think for modular, it's specifically about like people building weird things that are hard to build using some shared execution environment. Like when Ethereum built the EVM, or when I totally designed the SVM, you might like it's designed in a specific way that's for certain weird use cases. It's hard to do. It's hard to implement economically. Like the EVM and Solana have kind of like weird constraints. Like Solana has like this 1.3 kilobyte transaction limit, or certain cryptography might not be efficient. So I think for me, for building stuff on Celestia or building stuff as a rollup, it's specifically for those weird use cases that are trying to do weird stuff that need to define their own execution environment. Like Pay is an example of that. It's like a payments app that has a specific sequencing paradigm and uses specific cryptography to make ZK cryptography to make the payments private preserving. There's some other examples of that. Like there's like these on-chain games. Like someone created Curio created this 0.5 second tick engine where they managed to put a real-time strategy game on chain, and they did that by modifying the EVM and embedding some game engine as an opcode in the EVM, which is kind of really cool. So it's just like doing these weird things that people haven't, like a base layer with a specific smart contract environment might not have predicted.
So that's the build whatever idea, right?
Yeah.
We don't know what you're going to build. Here you go. Anurag?
Yeah, I think, so I've been spending a lot of time on the ground, especially in Southeast Asia and others, right? Like I've actually also been dropping into super team events. Solana does a great job on the ground, by the way.
Yeah.
And so the question I've been kind of getting is, like what new things should we build with all this stuff, right? Like, I mean, I mean, they've already seen all the DeFi stuff, the payment stuff, NFT stuff, and all of that, right? Like, I mean, it's very hard for new people who come in, especially the younger folks, who are very much used to, like, if you move outside of crypto, they're very much used to a very API-centric, bring your business logic in, build a business over that sort of a thing. And that thing is missing a lot in crypto in general. And so really the idea is, can we be more opinionated and provide more higher level abstractions, for example? So I mean, things like, for example, Lens is doing a open social sort of a thing. And that kind of a thing I can get behind, right? Like, I mean, in terms of, if you kind of look at the most valuable companies in the world, all of these are platforms, right? Like, I mean, look at Google, Amazon, Facebook, Uber, Airbnb. And so really, you know, like if you look at Lens, it's trying to do unbundle social. If you look at other similar projects, they're trying to unbundle a particular business vertical. Like, so I think we have to, of course, you know, there's a lot of infrastructure that is being built, still being built, but we also need to be more opinionated on what this can be applied with. Otherwise, you know, like if you actually go to the ground.
Yeah, we are in that sort of a phase of crypto or Web3 where, you know, Shriram is building his services, you guys are building your DA layers, and John is building his Initia. So we're just building a whole bunch of infrastructure with no real, I mean, I can't say that about DYDX, you guys know what you're building, right? And but it's like someone else will figure out what to do for the user, it's not our problem. That sounds, is that the modular thesis? I mean, like, yeah, it's not our problem, someone else will figure it out? Anurag and Mustafa?
I don't think so. In general, see, again, it's a phasing thing, right? Like, I mean, something like we wanted to build at the low-level infrastructure, like something like database sampling didn't exist in production, right? Like, without which you cannot think of building this multi-rollup sort of thing on top, right? Like, and all this effort has to go in parallel, right? Like, so again, I come back to Solana, right? Like, I mean, I think Super Team doing a fantastic job. You go drop into one of these events, listen to the kids, the kind of experience that
it's awesome.
You know, like, so this has to be replicated, right? Like, and you have to give people more opinionated problems, and it cannot be just you know, like you know, build whatever you want. Right?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to take sides on that one. I think
one thing Ajit, people should be building on and maybe trying to spend more time thinking of is how do we distribute the Web3 products we are all building. So if you are at the infrastructure level, maybe distribution is a little bit easier. If you are closer to the app level, how do you bring your products where the users are? But I see so many teams, and we are part of this kind of trend, and I'm working on trying to shape it in another way.
But Charles, your chain is not a modular chain. It's kind of like, you know, it's just one integrated stack for trading perps.
Yeah, but still, so with our own chain, we need to think like, okay, do we just want the people to come to our shop and our chain, or do we want basically our chain to become like a piece of infrastructure for trading, and do we want to essentially bring DYDX where the users are? And many people think we are competing with the other DeFi protocol. I'm not competing with the other DeFi protocol. It's a tiny market. I'm competing with CeFi.
So if your you know, app chain works perfectly fine and it's kind of relatively integrated, why do we need modular chains? It seems to do a perfectly fine job. Sorry, Mustafa, over to you. Why, if DYDX works perfectly fine, why do we need the modular chains? Why not build another osmosis or, yeah, sorry, go ahead, Mustafa.
I mean, the reason is because the question doesn't make sense. It does not matter what the architecture is called. It just needs to solve the problem that exists. So for example, Polymarket, okay, great app, useful, people use it. Most people probably that use it, you know, the election people probably don't know what Polygon is. And they don't need to, it's okay. The app just needs to work and then solve a problem in some way.
But then we don't even need a blockchain, right? We might have just put it on Amazon QLDB and...
well, like, ideally the blockchain enables things that weren't possible before, otherwise there's no point. But like, you know, I remember in 2021, when everybody was going crazy about like trading cards for NBA Top Shot, that was on Flow. I mean, I don't really know Flow, anything about it, but like no one cared about what the app was or the blockchain was called. I mean, we care because we build the blockchains themselves, but fundamentally it's about the use case and working backwards. That's the only thing.
I think that's a bit of a simplistic view to some extent. Sorry, I'm the one debating now, which wasn't kind of my role. But what I've seen with Cosmos app chains is that DYDX is very successful, but a lot of chains were not very successful, and they didn't really have a lot of economic security. So IBC was kind of unreliable because on the receiving end, you had a chain that was not particularly secure.
I think DYDX is an interesting example of that, right? Like, DYDX started out as a rollup, so it kind of like benefited from this modular paradigm, and then kind of moved to a chain, but and that's fine, right? Like DYDX was able to do that because of the specific use case, but they had a lot of economic security already to switch to a chain.
That's right, but 1,000 other Cosmos chains did not have enough economic security, like UMI and
exactly, and that's where modularity fits in.
That's
because
right.
with rollups, you don't need to have a secure validator set or economic security because you're inheriting security from the base layer. Ideally, if the
and that was our bull case for Ethereum because Ethereum, the token works beautifully. It's economically secure, so you can deploy rollups on it.
Yeah.
So you kind of solved that problem by creating a base layer that's economically secure, right?
Yeah.
Also, of course, Charles can correct me, but DYDX also moved because Starkex wasn't as flexible as they wanted it to be. If Starkex was, they were focusing on Starknet and stuff like that, right? So I think if Starkex would have been more pliant, I don't think this shift would have happened.
I got it.
One thing which was enabled by the migration away from Ethereum to the Cosmos SDK for DYDX was much more freedom and space to create and reinvent the token economics. And that's very, very important. That's at the heart of any business. Should it be on-chain, off-chain, hybrid?
And that works because you have a token that accrues a lot of MEV, so it's, it's a successful app, so you can have your own app chain.
Maybe when you're partially modular and or not, when you go into one like monolithic chain which hosts everyone, you have
which
a
is what
dependency
Hayden
on
is
the
doing
token
now with
economics
Uniswap,
of the general purpose blockchain you're going to be hosted by, right?
Yeah.
When you build your own blockchain, it takes responsibility, it takes challenge in security of the chain, all these things. But you get also like more space to twist the token economics and revamp them. We're going to probably revamp the token economics of DYDX in the coming weeks.
That brings us to what Mert was referring to in John Charbonneau's paper, right? So if you have a successful app like Hayden's app, Uniswap, then you want your own app chain. If you don't have a very successful app, then you want to rely on someone else's shared economic security, right? Like Celestia or Avail or Ethereum or something or the other. So there is this thing, and then if you have a successful app chain like Osmosis, then you want to host other apps like this lending thing, Mars or something else. But if if that doesn't work, then you go back to. So there is a Charbonneau loop, which I'm a big fan of.
The same way you start your business on Shopify and maybe eventually go on your own server on AWS, and if you're really big, you start to have your own server, bare metal somewhere. I think it's an evolution, and if you have the chance to be growing fast, you can kind of jump steps. Right?
So it doesn't look like anyone really disagrees with the modular thesis around here, Mert, unless you do.
Fundamentally, the modular thesis, as it was defined, is about separating out execution consensus and all these parts.
That's right.
And I think that makes sense. I never disagreed with that part. Okay. I've disagreed with the framing of it being against monolithic, where monolithic is not defined, or maybe it's defined in like how Ethereum used to work back in the day, but it's not really how most modern L1s work in practice today. They're modular, but they're integrated. They bring things in-house. It's kind of more like it.
That's a very interesting way to look at it, Mustafa.
Yeah, I think for me, the debate was originally more about like this cultural thing, where I know you say that for Solana, like you see Solana as coexisting with multiple chains, but I feel like there was very much a culture, and there still is a culture of like, if you have a monolithic chain, then your position is like, my chain is the end game, and we don't have a multi-chain ecosystem. I feel like that's the general, so we've been stuck in this like layer one loop where like every cycle there's these new layer ones, and they kind of like, they see themselves as the end game. Whereas modularity is supposed to be like a shifting from the zero-sum mindset to a positive-sum mindset, where adding more infrastructure or adding more chains should not be seen as your chain or your infrastructure is the end game, but more like your infrastructure adds to components that developers can use. And I know you said that that's not how you see Solana is, but I feel like that isn't that like how Anatoly kind of sees it to some extent.
I mean, Anatoly is certainly. He kind of has the engineer's mind where he's like, we can actually scale for the entire world. I disagree, but again, it's an ecosystem of multiple people that work on it. I mean, he just sells phones.
Okay, I'm just going to tweet that Mert disagrees.
I actually have to build on it.
Tweet it straight away.
But there's another point here,
Let's
which
light a fire.
I think is interesting about Mustafa's point, which is the culture aspect in like the zero sum and like closed offness, right? Yeah. Because that also happens in modularity to some extent. In where I see it is Ethereum, where it's like, you must use ETH as money, you must settle on Ethereum, you must use ETH or EigenDA for DA.
I support that.
Right? And then, but then
not the EigenDA part, but the ETH part.
Right? And it's like, well, why not? I mean, you could also use Celestia DA or like Avail DA, like all these, you can use Arbitrum, but then the Optimism guys will get upset, and then it's like the OP set. So like, I think that also exists in other modular.
Hey, we're going to go to Thailand and like give each other a hug, and it'll all be fine.
No, I think some of this also can be explained very simple, right? There used to be a time when, there's still a time when people used to launch blockchains to become an Ethereum killer.
Yep.
Now,
that's still going on, by the way.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
But now, Solana is the new Ethereum, right? Like, so everyone wants to be a soul killer, for example. And so, really, that I think the point that Solana guys are being beaten with the modular stick is also really a positioning play.
Right. So I think what I'm hearing is a very interesting. It's like this hybrid model where there are chains like DYDX and Solana that have enough economic security, some differentiated use cases and experiences and applications, and then you have these modular chains like Avail, Celestia, Ethereum, and others, and you have these app chains and rollups built on top. But all of these, like these two different types of architectures where you have integrated or monolithic chains interoperating with L2s, interoperating with sovereign rollups on sovereign like DA layers. So we are sort of saying, look, we don't know which way it's going to go, but there is a place for both types of architectures. Is that the compromise we are making, or are we taking a more opinionated stance that no, it's either going to be this way or that way?
Okay, yeah, I mean, that's pretty much the stance. The way I always phrased it is like, to maximize the probability of success for a crypto future, you need to ensure that people are experimenting with different design spaces. You need to exhaust all paths, because we don't know what the killer use cases will be. I mean, stablecoins is one, maybe prediction markets is one, DeFi is one. There's going to be others. And so if we all go in collectively on one architecture, and then maybe that architecture has some weird weakness that we just didn't see coming. Because like, these things are always easy to say looking back, but once as you're building them, it's very hard to predict, right? And so for a successful future, you need to exhaust all paths. It's kind of how I look at it.
So I'm missing one person in this panel, my Sriram. So Sriram shows up in every panel where he's not, because he talks about this thing called the verifiable cloud. Right, so that's a thing that Gavin and the Jam guys have also spoken about, and I think Anurag referred to a bit of that, which is, right now we have, Web 2 is cloud-based architectures, and these things scale horizontally. Blockchains scale fairly poorly, right? So but now with modular DAs, we have a far more interesting and scalable way of creating these, and we are starting to solve problems of shared security. We are starting to solve problems of interoperability, like with Initia's interwoven rollups and this and that. So I guess now what's the next step in the evolution, right? So Sriram and I think Polkadot guys talk about this idea of somehow creating these architectures that provide verifiability, right? Like cryptographic or cryptoeconomic verifiability, which means someone actually has a stake in making a commitment that they're making, credible commitments. But you're creating this sort of linear scalability, horizontal scalability, where if you add more nodes or more infrastructure, you don't slow the whole damn thing down, right? So which is very different from, let's say, blockchains, where if you add more nodes, you slow things down. So are we actually going towards a cloud future eventually, which is, which is funny because people, sorry, I'm loud thinking here. Some of the Ethereum guys used to refer to Solana as the cloud, and that was derogatory. Now I think we're talking about verifiable clouds, which is, look, Web 2 Web3 needs the same sort of apps that Web2 has, but they need to be verifiable, as in we don't want to rely on a centralized intermediary. We want to be able to create any arbitrary application, like, whatever, but we want verifiability. Is that where we are going with all of this?
Do you pay attention to Urbit or Keynote?
Who?
Urbit, U-R-B-I-T.
Oh, yes.
So that's maybe something I'm paying a little bit of attention when I have bandwidth to that, thinking like maybe the future of all this.
They were building an
tech
operating
stack.
system of sorts with the
I mean,
token.
it's a weird story. It's a rabbit hole of itself. But I suggest anyone who have weeks to put into it to put
That's
some
quite
time there. But
entertaining, yeah.
eventually, I'm not an engineer myself, but it's just thinking you're going to run your own personal server and you're going to come to services or blockchains with your own data, and you're going to run locally quite a few things. And the internet stack is not like bricks after another with some legacy on top of each other, but just thinking, okay, we all restart from a blank sheet. I think the original architecture is probably being twisted by some forks and stuff, but there is something to pay attention to.
Yeah.
Thinking that we're going to have our own server, and we had a demonstration during the DYDX day yesterday at Cosmoverse where Brian from Chorus One was essentially deploying the DYDX app on an Urbit planet.
Right.
An Urbit planet is like an online server, which is a personal server. So you were basically running your own front end and calling the blockchain under.
That's
so I'm not
very
sure
interesting.
I'm answering your questions, but that's kind of.
So is modular also an interim step,
So,
towards something bigger?
so I think there's some interesting things to be said about verifiability. Like, first, I have two things to say. Like, first of all, I don't agree that restaking is a verifiable cloud. To me, that's all the opposite of verifiability, because if you're relying on a crypto economic committee, that's not verifiable. Verifiable means that you can, like, end users can verify the state of the chain and the transactions without having to rely or trust on some third-party committee. So I don't really understand how restaking is a verifiable cloud. To me, that's the opposite.
That's a good challenge.
But the second point I want to make, I think, and the more interesting point, is in terms of like making blockchains verifiable. I mean, the interesting point is like monolithic chains like Solana and modular chains like Ethereum and Celestia. If you think about it, like there's an argument that the end game for those chains actually look very the same. It's just like the path to get there is very different, and I think various people have made that argument before. But the idea, and like Vitalik has a blog post about the end game, and then I told you guys also this end game architecture. But at the end of the day, it looks very similar in the sense that you have like a high throughput chain, and the block productions of those chains might be somewhat centralized, either in the sense that there's big block producers, or that you need very high hardware requirements, like in Solana. But the end user, and even in Celestia, for example, we want to have very big blocks, so it will be expensive to be a validator. But the end game is that even though the block production might be expensive, verifiability should be cheap for the end user. And that's where things like verifiable light clients come in.
That's right.
That's why Celestia has data availability sampling and fraud proofs and ZK proofs. And that's why like people are exploring building light clients on Solana to verify, to add ZK proofs or sampling to Solana. So if you think about it, like the end game for like both architectures are very similar. It's just that for modular architecture, we started building the verifiable aspect, and then for monolithic architecture like Solana, they started building the high throughput block production aspect.
Yeah, we don't talk enough about light clients, and I think that was something that Cosmos thought about early, and Ethereum's consensus being a bit complicated, didn't really think about. Anurag, what's your take on this, the verifiable cloud thesis?
I mean, specific terminology can be pretty tricky. Like verifiable cloud is like Web3, like it can be anything. Like Web3 means everything on chain. Verifiable cloud means everything verifiable.
That's right. But end user verifiable is the important part, is what I heard.
Yeah. So I mean, sure. I mean, of course, see, all of these are optimizations on how this infrastructure can be run, right? Like, I mean, of course, data availability sampling is important for verification. Of course, ZK proofs are important for execution verifications. You don't need to run like, full nodes to verify, for example, and so on. But in general, like I think all of these are in service of creating some infrastructure that can let people interact with each other, coordinate with each other, essentially, right? Now, it's peer-to-peer, whether that peer is a person, company or whatever, right? Like now, really, I mean, see, the world runs on ledgers. We have had APIs for so many years. Like, why are not all of these systems tied to each other? Why don't these systems talk to each other? Because if you want to use an API, you have to sign a bilateral contract to kind of use an API. Not all systems are open. What these systems are in the service of is, can we provide these, composable platform where you can plug in once and, like interact with all of these peers and entities.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, so that is, I would say, better. Like you can, I think a verifiable cloud or those are a little bit of a marketing spiel.
I like marketing speak. I'm a KOL apparently. So, anyways, so I think this is the key to unraveling probably the whole thing, which is, look, we already have a bunch of applications. First of all, who needs blockchains in the first place? I mean, it's debatable, right? But I think what blockchains really offer is verifiability, which is again a buzzword, but also buzzwords do add value. And the second part is what we call censorship resistance, which is probably the flip side of that. I mean, there might be other things. And then if we can create applications that are trust minimized, that's another buzzword. Then we can probably that are interoperable, that are secure. Then I think we probably add some value to what's already there, right? So Uber works for me today. Airbnb works for me today. I mean, I use trading systems. It works perfectly fine. So why do I even need any of this? I mean, I can trade, pump fun memes on, whatever, Amazon QLDB or some other centralized system. It doesn't really matter. So I think there is and then the question becomes, what sort of architecture leads us to that, utopia of trust minimized applications where we're not relying on central intermediaries. And it's not just Bitcoin, but generalized Bitcoin, maximally generalized, application set for what, Bitcoin is also a Cosmos app chain. That's a meme that I kind of believe in. Then Solana, I troll Mert often, is a Cosmos app chain. So we're the app chain thesis was probably fundamentally correct, but then now we are solving problems of shared security, we're solving problems of interoperability, and then I think, the whole modular thesis really starts to give us a way forward. I think, Mert, you evaded my questions about network extensions. Do you want to tell us a bit more before we close as to what are those modular Solana or what is it?
Yeah. So network extensions, basically, most of the terminology, and by the way, my tweets say I'm against naming them network extensions, so I'm just stealing the other side.
Tweet.
So basically, the idea is most of the terminology in crypto comes from an EVM-centric place. Right, because most of the research is done there. I mean, Solana literally does not do research, except for like random blog posts on healy.dev/blog. And basically, the terminology sometimes is very Ethereum-centric. And so when you have something like a ZK compression on Solana, which is like everything still happens on the L1, but it trades state space for ledger space. That's like a super weird word and concept because it doesn't exist on Ethereum. Because state and data and logic are decoupled on Solana. And then people like Adam Cochran will be like, this is an L2. And I'll be like, no, we built it. It's not an L2. Everything is on the L1. Execution is on L1. It's not what you think. And so there's certain things like this, like Neon EVM is another, which is basically it's a node that converts EVM code into SVM code. And then somebody will be like, oh, that's a L1.5 or like something like that. And so there's a lot of these weird systems that don't map to the Ethereum world model. And those things, you don't want to call them L2s because they're not L2s objectively. Now you can if you want because maybe you don't care and you're just a user or something. That's fine. But then there are actual L2s on Solana, right? Like there's sovereign rollups like Zeta, who's using I believe the Sovereign Labs SDK to use Solana as kind of the main layer. So that does exist, but like some of them are completely different from that. And so what do you call which, et cetera? Tolly says that if execution is still on the L1, then it's not, parasitic, and therefore it's not technically an L2 or something. But then people have different motivations for labeling these things. And to me, the point of a label is that it's descriptive and specific and describes what's happening. And when you blanket label everything as a network extension, it might be an L2, it might not be an L2. You don't know. You just made it more confusing.
I would love for someone to take the opposite side of this. If anyone wants to, Mustafa, Anurag.
I mean,
Not,
I think,
yeah.
okay, I agree with it, but to play devil's advocate, to play like the contrarian take to, oh yeah, it's just whatever has applications, whatever, or like do whatever you need to build applications. Contrarian take is, I guess this is why like Solana got a lot of early criticism for being quote unquote centralized, is that like if you hyper focus on just like, let's say, oh, just use whatever you need for your application, then it's like, where do you draw the boundary between just saying, let's just use a Web2 database, right? Like Polymarket could in theory be like a MySQL database with a single, like it could be a centralized exchange masquerading as a MySQL database that feels like a blockchain, but is actually just a centralized betting exchange where you can deposit USDC, and users would not be one hell difference. So I think that the other line, the contrarian take to that is, well, actually, we should care about labeling these things, and users should care about what these things actually are, because that's what differentiates Web3 from Web2. Because like the Web, you want what users should care about what specific properties that these Web3 applications have that they can't see immediately, be like from their eyes, like things like what are the security properties, what are the censorship-resistant properties, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, I mean, so I actually think we're saying the same thing. The reason I don't like the name network extensions is it's too broad and it homogenizes everything underneath. Like something that's not an L2 or is an L2 is going to have different characteristics for trust and risk.
Yeah.
And if you just call it a network extension, you don't know what you're getting.
I mean,
so I'm in favor of calling them what they are in granular terms.
Yeah, so I'll take the other side of that, which is, when I read Delphi's report on how many different types of rollups were there, I was like, do I have to worry about this stuff now? I might as well just, go back to using something else. If I have to worry about how many different types of rollups are there and how many trust assumptions are being made, and with the bridge and with the rollup, and with I shouldn't have to worry about this, right? I'm just probably grandma on a mobile phone. So I think there are both sides of this debate. You're saying that maybe the user should know what trust assumptions they are making. There's value in that for sure. There is also value in, users don't particularly want to know. They just want to know that their money is safe. Anurag or Charles, do you have a view on this? And then we can summarize and close. I think on
the messaging on the security risks, right. I mean, there is always like the L2-bit police, for example, to kind of
that's right.
succinctly bring out what, I mean, it's the messaging is not for users in general, right? Like, I mean, so there is always going to be some sort of L2-bit police or network extensions bit police.
And they are unbiased, right?
They are, I mean, they are objectively, by far I would say,
relatively unbiased. Yeah.
So there is always going to be that, right? Like, and there's always going to be like a clear laying out. I mean, just as in the real world, I mean, there are, you have audits done, you have certifications done, for example, you attest to whatever it is. In this is much more cryptographic, cryptoeconomic, for example, and so
that's right.
So it's the same thing. Users don't really need to like get into the
we never read the terms and conditions on a website.
Of course,
I
mean, it's going to be L2-bit being the like unofficial de facto certifier of this, for example, and but yeah, in general, of course, you don't have to design your infra so that people can rug your smart contract of like bridge funds, for example, and so on.
Okay, so I think the debate, the goal of this debate wasn't to settle the case or come to a conclusion, but I think it was more to sort of, create for our esteemed panelists, probably the 4 best experts I can find on, what's really going on in the space of Web3 architecture. So sometimes when we focus on blockchains, or whichever token we love, whether it's Ethereum, Solana, something or the other, we kind of miss where this whole thing is going. And I think the work that Mustafa and team have done, and that Avail, Anurag and team and others have followed is, and kind of, continue to build on, is kind of is a breakthrough disruptive innovation in terms of all the problems we've been trying to solve for 10 years, right? Like shared security, interoperability, and then also the UX of it, which I think Solana obviously leads right now. So I also agree with Mert, which is, okay, at the end of the day, we have to deliver utility and applications and not just more blockchains. Otherwise, what's all this for? Then from a developer perspective, obviously, there is value in knowing what you're building on because developers do care how AWS, which AWS services they're using, what the terms and conditions are, what liabilities they're signing up for. So at some point, these things will start to, merge, and then this idea of verifiability. And I think there was a great challenge from Mustafa about what sort of verifiability are we talking about. I think end-user verifiability, light clients are incredibly valuable. And I think will fundamentally define, because I still use Infura and Mert's RPC provider. So hopefully with light clients, I won't have to use them. So there's a lot of value that's been created in the last year or so with modular architectures that will start to come in and show real impact in the next couple of years, just like Solana, right? With Serum, Solana, I think the first application that got my attention was Serum because you just couldn't do it on Ethereum. So I think hopefully at some point we can create applications that you can only build on Celestia's stack or a Whale stack, or things you can only build by composing DYDX and Solana with one of these app chains. So very exciting times. Also a lot of, and thanks to Mustafa, Mert, Anurag, and Charles for enlightening us. And hopefully, I tried to provoke you guys. It wasn't very successful.
Thank you.
But thank you so much for taking the bait once in a while.
Thank you.
Have a nice day. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.